Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. I am back from vacation. I went on a cruise with my husband and his aunt and uncle, had a blast. I came back though with not only no tan, thank you, sunscreen, but also one YouTube video lighter because I have officially joined the ranks of those of us on YouTube who have been directly censored. Um, I got a vague kind of auto generated email that I violated medical misinformation policies on YouTube. I appealed it, couldn't get any details. I reviewed the video, checked it against the original source that I pulled it from, which is still on YouTube. The guy goes through on Dr. Drew's podcast, actually. The only difference I could find is that I didn't, and I could have said a number wrong. I could have misspoke on, one of the details, but the overarching theme of the video and the takeaways that one might draw from the video that I posted was consistent with the actual data. And I dive into iffy territory sometimes on my podcast because I do like to use statistics. I'm not a statistician. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a medical expert. But I do like to I find the numbers interesting and I find them compelling. So I do try to recap numbers. So it's possible, I said 47% when the real number is 43%. I'm assuming that was the case and that it had nothing to do with, of all my videos on YouTube, that one had more views than all of my other videos combined and was gaining traction. I'm sure it has nothing to do with that. I'm sure it's just more that I said a number wrong or something. I don't know what it is though. I can't get any details from YouTube, not surprisingly. The video does still exist on Rumble. If you're on Rumble, it exists on all podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, currently at least. So I don't know, but I figured I'd come on and talk about censorship. The only difference I could find between my video and the original source and Dr. Drew's video and their longer conversation was that Dr. Drew, both in the show notes and on his podcast, along with a lot of these videos that stay up on YouTube, they provide a disclaimer that, this is not medical advice, blah, blah, blah. So that could be the case. So in case anyone is confused, I know I give off doctor vibes and scientist vibes as I throw on the first t-shirt, plug in a USB microphone. The first t-shirt I see in my drawer, a USB microphone is plugged in and I get in front of a camera after I put my kids to bed. I know it's confusing. I know I'm wearing a super official lab coat vibe t-shirt right now that currently reads motorcycle, and I'm not even going to read what's underneath it that you can't see because it's borderline inappropriate. And I have my, IKEA lamp in the background. I have my pink and white striped water that I drink from. I know this all looks super official. But you guys, I'm actually not a medical professional. I'm actually not a doctor. So I can see where YouTube thought, she's probably creating confusion. This does look like, official disinformation. But yeah, I was talking in that video, by the way, about just all-cause mortality rates and some of the data that this actual expert was analyzing from health insurance data, disability data, and also CDC data, and kind of how he overlaid that to draw some conclusions, or some rather really just signals to take a look at. So let's talk about censorship. I think when I think of censorship, and a lot of us are probably in a similar boat, we think of and I don't think anybody wants to be called like I promote censorship. I think we all most of us, I hope, we are living in the United States of America, where one of our foundational principles is free speech. And I think that there's a lot of, valid conversation around, the extent to which that should apply when we talk about government. Censorship versus private companies, for example, a lot of these tech giants. I think a lot of us are in a position like I am where we're just concerned that, look, these tech giants they're essentially serving in a way as governing bodies because they're governing the type of discourse that we can speak, the type of discourse we have access to look at. And I think most Americans, I have to remember, like, I find politics and things that are going on in the world and these social issues, I find it really fascinating. And I like to take in a lot of information. I don't do it, as often as, an expert would. I have a life that I live, and it's a full life. But when I'm in the car, on the way to a 12-step meeting or an appointment or whatever, I'm usually listening to a podcast, or I'll read an article when I have a moment. I really enjoy great journalism, and I even enjoy some crappy journalism that I disagree with, because I like to see what all sides are saying. And usually, I think if we're all being honest, at least, I think that most of us actually kind of fall on a spectrum. A lot of these issues are presented to us as binary, like it's us versus them. We have to like squash out the evil ones who are trying to spread misinformation that leads to actual harm. But most of us, like vaccines, for example, it's not binary. You're not either an anti-vaxxer or an always vaxxer. You can be those things, but there are also a lot of us who are just like, no, we just don't like this one, or believe that my family should, or everybody as a one size fits all solution should have to take this one. There's all kinds of opinions across the spectrum, and at any given time, it could look different for an individual. My opinions constantly shift because I constantly get new information. It's why I don't buy into the partisan. I understand the partisan system and why it has utility, but I don't buy into this one side's narrative is always correct. I was walking through the airport, and I saw something on TV, and I told my husband it was about a politician, and something that he did, kind of a stunt that he pulled, and it's a politician that I really like and support in general. And I told my husband, I said, wow, he did something I didn't like. And I told him about it. He was like, oh, what? Because I think that's normal. I don't think that just because I, may at this moment in time go vote for a politician, that something that politician does tomorrow wouldn't make me question that or change my mind. Because I'm a normal, ordinary human being who cares about a huge set of issues that ultimately impact me and my family, and my opinions shift over time. And as I get access to new information, sometimes I like it, sometimes I disagree. I think that's healthy, but we're living in a world of binary, where you either have to be for this or you're anti. And I think that that's a really dangerous position for us to be in. And I'll talk a little bit about why. But first, I want to kind of highlight, I'm going to post a link in the show notes, but this is from Glenn Greenwald's Substack. Glenn Greenwald is a longtime, well-respected journalist. Well-respected, I should say, except by partisan kind of left-wing figures. Ironically, he used to be kind of embraced by the progressives. And these days, since his kind of outspokenness against government censorship and more kind of establishment issues, he's been kind of painted as a disseminator of misinformation, almost, or maybe entirely. I'm not sure the extent to which he's been censored, but I know that he's been a little bit on the outs in the journalism community, along with other independent journalists like him who are doing great work still, and not just mouthpieces for the kind of big tech and government and establishment figures. So take that for what it is. That's my opinion and my understanding of Glenn Greenwald. His Substack is incredible. He's a great writer. He dives pretty deep into a lot of these issues that he covers, and it's really thought-provoking. You learn a lot. I'll link to the article, but I just want to highlight a few of the things that he covers. So he and others have been reporting on what he calls the new and utterly fraudulent disinformation industry. So I think that, a lot of us, even myself, before I started really delving more into this more recently, kind of view the disinformation campaign as like these piecemeal things kind of happening in a vacuum. Like, sure, Twitter as a private organization may just make a one-time kind of call on, we're going to ban this person. Or, Google may shut down somebody's Android phone because, they were trying to kind of moderate an issue. And it's always presented, and it kind of seems in my mind like it's this nebulous kind of world of, there's no one kind of centralized organization in our minds who's driving what is disinformation and the active campaign to squash it out. There actually is. And so this article does a great job of diving into what this kind of, what the mechanisms actually are behind this painting of what is and isn't disinformation, and the respective censorship of that information. For example, my video getting pulled off of YouTube. Yeah. The only reason I'm kind of pissed about it is because I'm like, look, I'm not I'm not an anti anything, really. I think I'm open to all views. I'm open to all opinions. And all I want to do is learn and be allowed to come to my own conclusions, and also be allowed to speak my own conclusions to other people. We're all adults here. If your kids watching, go to bed. Like, go to bed. Um, Kids can watch. It's fine. You can stay. I respect you. I'm not an ageist or anything. I think that you're awesome. And I'm really impressed you're watching this instead of on TikTok. But most of us are just like ordinary people walking around trying to make the best decisions we can with the information we have. Some of us, I've talked to friends recently who are completely staying away from information, kind of like I was for a time period, just to protect my own mental health and my family's togetherness, since I lived at the time with a husband diametrically opposed to my political views. And so we just couldn't talk about it for a while. And I thought, through prayer and, reading scripture and really meditating on it, I could totally change his mind. And, we did learn from each other a lot. But guess who changed their mind the most? Me. And guess who has educated her husband since then on a lot of the stuff that's going on in our country? Me. Yeah, sometimes I feel like I'm being punked by the universe. Like, all the things I said I would never do and never be are the things that God's like, LOL, actually, here you go. But yeah, I say that because I think that when we talk about disinformation, it feels like kind of a nebulous concept. Like, there's no concrete organization or power behind this campaign. So let's talk about what Glenn Greenwald says about that. Okay, this newly minted, self-proclaimed expertise grounded in little more than crude political ideology claims the right to officially decree what is true and what is false, for purposes of, among other things, justifying state and corporate censorship of what its own quote-unquote experts decree to be disinformation. So this kind of not starts, but at some point, I guess the organization of it does start with, you have to have people somewhere deciding what is true and what is false. And this is happening, as it turns out, not in some random fashion where, we have medical experts determining over here what is medically true and false. We have, the best of the best war experts deciding what is true and what is false over here. We have the best of the best social experts deciding what is true and false and what you can't say about the trans conversation, particularly in terms of trans affirming care for minors. It's not happening in a vacuum. So this industry as a whole, because there actually are organizations, and I'm going to name them, it's funded by a consortium of a small handful of neoliberal billionaires. So George Sorros and Pierre Omidyar. Don't know how to say that name. So it's funded by actual politically active billionaires, along with, it's funded by U.S. agencies, British agencies, and EU intelligence agencies. So these are government and billionaire mergers of funding, and they are funding anti-disinformation groups. And they often masquerade around benign sounding names. So here are a few of the names. The Institute for Strategic Dialogue. Sounds fancy. The Atlantic Council's Digital Forensics Research Labs. Ooh, that sounds above my level of intelligence right there. I better just let them decide what's true and false. Bellinicat, yeah, they could do better on the name. And the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. Yeah, these all sound very official and benign, like I should just trust them. They're designed to cast the appearance of apolitical scholarship. So these agencies are designed to look like we're just unbiased, glasses wearing, calculator wielding, this is true and this is false, and we're just making recommendations based on that because we're the experts. No, they're politically active billionaire funded and U.S. intelligence agency funded, and really Western intelligence agency funded. They're designed to cast the appearance of apolitical scholarship, but their only real purpose is to provide a justifying framework to stigmatize. Step 1, stigmatize it. Step 2, repress it. And step 3, censor any thoughts, views, and ideas that dissent from neoliberal establishment orthodoxy. It exists, in other words, to make censorship and other forms of repression appear scientific rather than ideological. Words I can't say today. So this, by the way, hasn't happened just overnight necessarily, but crises, as I'm going to dive into and kind of recap some of Glenn Greenwald's other observations here, crises lend themselves very well to amplifying censorship efforts. Crises are great opportunities to jump on it and scare people into you're either for this or you're anti. And even normal, ordinary people, and I have to admit that before my kind of spiritual and political awakening, I fell prey to this myself, where you see things and you're like, if I were looking at this in a vacuum and I knew nothing else, I would really question it and be like, are we sure like you're the good guys doing this? Like squashing this information. But when you're conditioned to believe like, no, either the Democrats are in charge, and I believed this, either the Democrats are in charge or we are going to be ruled by a white nationalist fascist dictator. What is a fascist again? I forget at this point. It's said so often. So no conspiracy theory that this ended, I'm getting back to Glenn's article, no conspiracy theory that this industry is funded by big tech. The West security state and politically active billionaires, for various legal reasons, they are required to disclose their funders, and these facts about who finances them are therefore based on their own public admission. So this is not like a conspiracy theory that this is funded by big tech and political billionaires like George Sorros, and I'm probably going to get censored just for saying George Soros. And he's a billionaire. It's a fact. He's a billionaire and he funds these organizations. Can I say that? Am I allowed to say that? Because it's the truth. Not bitter at all. So it's a fact that they are funded by them as well as intelligence agencies. For legal reasons, they are required to disclose this in various ways, even though they try to be quiet about it. We have access to this through putting the puzzle pieces of what we do have access to together. So often the financing is funded through well-established front groups for the CIA. So they're funded by the CIA, the State Department, and the U.S. national security state, such as, quote unquote, the National Endowment for Democracy. That sounds like a good thing. No, they fund these organizations who decide and then actively repress and censor what they deem to be misinformation. So the reasoning behind this, so every movement that has leveraged censorship as a political weapon, every group of people who justifies this, and we are guilty of this in the United States of America right now, a lot of ordinary, great, wonderful, well-meaning people who are just politically inclined to the left, and some to the right too. I'll just say we tend to actually, it's kind of ironic because of our reasoning power, kind of reason ourselves into justifying censorship. Because we all tell ourselves the same story, that it's not only justifiable, but it's morally necessary to censor, because not only do people disagree that the vaccines were the best strategy or that it was executed in the right way, but that's dangerous. That could really hurt and harm people. Not only are there people in our country who question the election results of 2020, but that's dangerous because it incites violence. Like, look at January 6th and the riots that happened at the Capitol. So it justifies, if you're like me and you were watching what was happening at the Capitol that day, and particularly the way that the news media was covering it, I was drawn in, I was appalled, I was disheartened, I was fearful. So, of course, it justifies when you have those emotions around these crises. It kind of justifies in your mind that, okay, free speech is less important right now because there's a bigger moral objective here to squash out people who are saying things that can incite violence, that can prevent people from getting a life-saving vaccine, that can make people question where the virus came from. Just as some examples. So in ordinary times, those same people will casually, talk about like, oh, free speech is a vital value. We're, all about free speech. We're a free country, freedom, freedom, freedom. Particularly in the Progressive Party, I thought that that's something that they always really valued was we can all live our lives freely, and we should be able to say whatever our opinions are, as long as our opinions aren't, but actively like hurting people. But these are not ordinary times, in case you haven't noticed. The kind of narrative that justifies censorship is like our enemies and their ideas are not only different, they're uniquely hateful and inflammatory and false, and they're dangerous. We hear the word dangerous right in front of the word misinformation all the time. So he writes, the ideas they espouse will destabilize society, cause direct harm to others, deceive people, and incite violence against institutions of authority and their followers. Thus, they reason, we are actually not censoring at all. We're simply preventing evil people from doing harm to society, the government, and citizens. Right? But take along with this our hyperpolarized political environment right now. Like I've found it very interesting that kind of tracking midterm polls that a lot of people are in states where the races are super close, whether it's gubernatorial campaigns or Senate races, and people are literally going like, I don't. I think it's probably best that the Republicans are in control because, and these are left wing people, by the way, or independents, kind of people who are a bit more moderate. I think it's better that the Republicans are in control because our economy kind of blows right now. Like we're in real bad times. I, can't hire anybody for my business, or, inflation is killing our family. Like or violence is like reigning in our big city. Whatever the case may be, they may say, I think it's best that Republicans are in control, but I like my Democratic candidate better. Bear in mind that something I talked about on a previous episode, that rich progressives were actively funding campaigns to prop up those same Republican opponents in primary elections. They wanted these unlikable, kind of questionable, more kind of provocative figures to win so that this very thing would happen, so that people are sitting here going, I think it's better for Republicans to be in control right now because clearly Democrats aren't necessarily like making things pan out in my best interest. But I like the Democrat candidate better. They seem like they have their head on straight, and maybe like they're more like normal and regular and not like this more provocative figure. So think about that, and like talk about meddling in elections. My God. So Glenn kind of concludes that section with, once that self-glorifying rationale is embraced, which is our adversaries do not merely disagree with us, but they cause harm with the expression of their views, then the more suppression, the better in our minds. We're like, yeah, suppress that. That's scary. Yeah, censor that. And that's exactly what's happening now. Problem is, too, from my perspective, especially when it trickles down to ordinary people like me, I'm like, wait a second, I'm not in an extremist hate group. Why am I getting censored? I don't understand this. So in 2012, Glenn Greenwald, just as a little flashback to something that's important and kind of an example of what's happening right now on a more massive scale, he co-founded the group called Freedom of the Press Foundation. And he founded it along with Oscar-winning Citizen Four director Laura Poitras. Man, why do people have names I can't pronounce? The Pentagon Papers whistleblower Daniel Ellsberg. Thank you, Daniel. And the creation of that group was in response to the 2010 demands then made by Senator Joseph Lieberman, Democrat from Connecticut, in his capacity as chairman of the Senate Homeland Security Committee, along with other people, blah, blah, blah. So that financial services companies such as the online payment processor PayPal, credit card companies MasterCard and Visa, and the Bank of America all terminated the accounts of WikiLeaks as a punishment for the group's publication of the Iraq and Afghanistan war logs. So as a quick reminder, WikiLeaks, like the big thing back in 2010, they published information that they got from somebody else. So they didn't hack. They didn't allegedly. I should add allegedly to all of this because it's, still pending like the whole legal system and conclusions. Remember, we live in an environment of innocent until proven guilty. So, take that for what it is. But all of these financial services companies and politicians, WikiLeaks published this information. It basically implicated the U.S. government in systemic war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan. Like, it's horrific to look at. I've peeked at some of it and I'm like, this doesn't feel like it's like good for my vibe today. I'm going to stop here. I think I've seen enough. So because of the just incredible nature of what they published, obviously the establishment had a strong reaction to that. And this was a point in time that basically they terminated the accounts of all WikiLeaks as punishment for the group's publication of the Iraq and Afghanistan war logs. A destroy their journalists, critics is exactly what blah blah blah. Okay, so Amazon then booted WikiLeaks off of its hosting platform. So they removed the group from the internet for weeks. So a guy who was involved with this, an engineer at the time at eBay/PayPal, at the time that PayPal censored the donations to WikiLeaks. By the way, they just like seized the funds. Okay, they just seized the funds. I guess that improved their bottom line. That's great for them. So last week, in response to numerous reports this year in 2022 of PayPal's expanding the use of expulsion from the financial system as punishment for what it deems extremist political views and activities, the tech investor Stephen Cole, so this guy who was an engineer there, he said, I was there when they censored donations to WikiLeaks in 2010. That's the first time I remember wondering, are we sure we're the good guys? And that's powerful because that's one person, that's an individual's actual, I really am interested in and really drawn to what actual individuals who aren't serving as a mouthpiece, but what actual individuals say about their experience as an insider at the time. And that at the time, by the way, was viewed as like a one-off thing. Like, we just gotta, yes, this kind of like collides in a way with free speech principles. It kind of collides in a way with just journalist freedom. However, like freedom of the press, which is also, I don't know if you've gone to United States of America school, but that's kind of one of our values too. But it was deemed as this one-off thing. Also, a quick reminder, this is not in the US, but our friend Justin Trudeau, I know how to pronounce his name. I just wanted to do that one on purpose. I remember thinking when he was cute. I'm so grossed out by that. But he issued an emergency decree granting himself the power to freeze the bank accounts of any Canadian citizen who he determined in his sole discretion was participating or otherwise supporting the truckers' protests against vaccine mandates and passports. As a result of his extraordinary seizure of unchecked power, Canadian banks froze about 7.8 million Canadian dollars in just over 200 accounts under emergency powers. So he empowered himself to freeze the personal bank accounts of anyone linked with the protest with no need for court orders. So, if that's not tyrannical, I don't know what is. And it worked, by the way. Because if people can't survive, it turns out, like if your number one need, let's take a look back at Maslow's hierarchy of need. What's on the bottom? I forget exactly what it is actually, but I know it has something to do with surviving, like living and staying alive. If people can't do that, they're not going to protest. So it worked. Last year, PayPal announced a new partnership. So the point of this, by the way, is also that PayPal has been doing this as an organization over the years anyway, but the recent crises have just only amplified their kind of empowerment of themselves to not just, we're not talking about deplatforming, we're talking about kicking people out of the financial system. So last year, PayPal announced a new partnership with the Anti-Defamation League, so the ADL, which was a once respected group that battled anti-Semitism and defended universal civil liberties. Sounds like a great group that I support, right? That resonates with me and my values. But then they became yet another standard liberal Democratic Party activist group devoted to censoring adversaries of neoliberal orthodoxy. So they have just, as one example, repeatedly defamed and demanded the firing of America's most watched host on cable news. So Fox News, Tucker Carlson. I've watched Tucker, and there are times I used to be totally just disgusted with him. I was like, who is this frat boy spewing nonsense? Now that my eyes have been open to a lot of what's going on in the world, I can see some of his commentary for what I can understand more where he's coming from, and I agree with a lot of his points. I also still disagree with him on some things. I know that's a novel concept, but you don't have to be pro Tucker Carlson or anti Tucker Carlson. You can just kind of like be in the same world with Tucker Carlson and listen to him when you want to, not listen when you don't want to. You can also be anti and you can also be totally pro. You can be those two opposite ends of the spectrum. You can also be along the spectrum. Why is this such a novel concept these days? The stated purpose of this PayPal/ADL partnership was to, quote, investigate how extremist and hate movements in the United States take advantage of financial platforms to fund their criminal activities. So the ultimate goal is uncovering and disrupting the financial flow that supports these people and these organizations. which the ADL, their justification is that they're white supremacists and anti-government organizations. So there's a justification. Over the past year, a wide range of individuals have had their PayPal accounts canceled due solely to disapproved political views and activism. One example, the lesbian activist, sounds initially like this is going to be a left-wing person, right? The lesbian activist Jamie Mitchell, hang in there with me because, she was notified by PayPal last month that the account of her activist group, Gays Against Groomers, was being immediately canceled due to unspecified rule violations. Man, YouTube, PayPal, you guys have a way of not specifying how we violated the rules. I feel you, Jamie. Moments later, the group, created by gay men and lesbians to oppose attempts by trans activists to teach trans dogma and highly controversial gender ideology to young school children, was notified that their account with PayPal's subsidiary Venmo was also canceled immediately, leaving them with few options to continue to collect donations. So these financial organizations are essentially cutting off the legs of dissenters, people who are dissenting from the pervasive left-wing, progressive, extreme narrative. Around the same time, whether you agree with it or not, that's what's happening. Whether you agree and support it or not, that's what's happening, is we're cutting off people's legs. Figuratively, YouTube, figuratively. I'm not accusing anybody of wielding a machete and cutting off people's legs in a literal sense. Around the same time, by the way, the British anti-woke and right-wing commentator Toby Young, I have no idea who Toby Young is, by the way. And guess what? I don't care who he is because these principles should apply to everybody, in my opinion. I like his last name, though. He had created a group called the Free Speech Union to oppose speech-based cancellations of accounts. He was notified by PayPal that the group's account used to accept donations was also being canceled. Though PayPal refused to notify Young of the reason for the cancellation, it did tell the Daily Mail it was trying to balance protecting the ideals of tolerance, diversity, and respect with the values of free expression. I disagree with some of the things a lot of these canceled people, because when they're canceled, I'll find that out because I like to dig, and then I'll look into who that person is and what they said that pissed people off. And oftentimes I'm like, not oftentimes, sometimes I'm like, oftentimes I'm like, yeah, I can see how that would piss other people off. And sometimes I'm like, that, strikes a nerve in me. I would hear that and just not listen to this person because I have something called a brain and God-given discernment and a gut, and I get to like decide what I believe and don't believe. I promise you can too. You get to just like receive information and decide like, I'm going to receive that and take that to heart and integrate that into my being. Or you can wholeheartedly reject it, or you can even like put it on a shelf for later and come back to it. Like, these are the options. But these organizations, PayPal, these financial organizations, these censorship industry and their organizational arms, they're going to decide for you what you can and can't know, and what you can and can't. They're essentially like parenting all of us and going like, this isn't like for their fragile ears. We need them to vote for us, so please shut up. So at the time of his PayPal expulsion, here's his fatal mistake. Young had become a vocal opponent of the UK government's escalating involvement in the war in Ukraine. Oh no. Somebody who questioned the warmongering narrative? What? Didn't that used to be a job of the left, by the way? I'm not like totally up on my history, but I thought that the left was supposed to be like anti-war and like the proponents of peace. When did that change? When did they get so entangled with the military industrial complex? Who, by the way, they're sending a bunch of diesel to, while we have a massive shortage that, by the way, in the next several days is going to cause a lot of issues in the U.S. is what's being reported. But I digress. So those two anti-establishment left-wing sites, so still talking about Mr. Young, whose name I like, and I have no idea who this guy is. So they were notified by PayPal that their accounts were being immediately closed and that the balances in their account would be seized and may never be returned. We're just going to keep your money and we may never get it back, you anti-Ukrainian war, bad, evil person. PayPal refused to tell either Newsite or Coinbase, which reported on the account closures, what its reasons were. It was just an arbitrary decree by an unseen authorities who were not only... We don't even know who this guy is. Is this like, I don't know, is he short or tall? Is it a bunch of people? Is it a woman? Is it a man? Is it like a trove of aliens that the government is hiding away from us, like making these decisions? This is ridiculous. Therefore, I feel like I have to talk about it in a ridiculous way. It was just an arbitrary decree by unseen authorities. They're unseen. We don't know where they are, or who they are, or how many there are. Who are these people? But for with no explanation and no, like, I hate to even say transparency, because it's like this is happening behind a completely closed door, and it's just like communicated through like an automated looking email that, oh, we're actually just gonna like take all your money and give you no ability or answer, no ability to get it back in the future, because you're deplatformed here now, and we don't know, maybe we'll give it back, maybe we won't. So that is tyrannical power right there. Earlier this month, if you remember, PayPal announced that it would fine account holders $2,500. So essentially just seize $2,500 of your money if, in PayPal's sole discretion, it was determined that those users were guilty of promoting misinformation. Needless to say, I have closed my PayPal account. In other words, I don't know about you, but I don't like, I'm not in a position to just like give PayPal $2,500 of my money every day of my life. So in other words, PayPal would just steal their own users' funds from their accounts as extrajudicial punishment for the expression of views that PayPal, presumably working in conjunction with liberal activist groups such as the ADL and billionaire-funded disinformation experts, decrees to be false or otherwise unacceptable. So what is the government's role in this? So in May, just as one example, the Department of Homeland Security, so the DHS, they attempted appointment of a clearly deranged partisan fanatic. This is Glenn Greenwald saying this, Nina Jankowicz, to effectively serve as, quote, this is a real title, disinformation czar. Sparked intense backlash. Well, yeah, if you call somebody a czar, it's probably going to spark backlash. But liberal media corporations, always the first to jump to the defense of the U.S. security state, in unison, if you notice, like, if you just like put on like, what's it called, like the news something network, and where you can see like side by side all of the cable news media at once, like they're all saying the same thing, you guys. It's, I mean, how do they all meet? How many of them are there? Who are they? Are they? Yeah, they're undisclosed like people too. But they in unison maligned the resulting anger over this audacious appointment as itself disinformation, which is like, that's hilarious to me. Like, you're going to appoint a disinformation czar? We have a problem with that. That's misinformation that you have a problem with that. That's amazing. I'm not even mad. I'm impressed. Without ever identifying anything false that was alleged about Jankowicz or the DHS program. So these are literally people going, no, we don't want this. This is like BS that the US government would appoint somebody to be disinformation czar. And the mechanisms behind that were like borderline illegal. So anyway, it was an attempt, though, to assign to the U.S. national security state the power to issue official decrees about what's true and what's false. It was a position and an attempted appointment at having this person, this Nina Jankowicz, I hope I'm pronouncing that wrong, appointed to serve as the central figure for what is true and what is false, which, if you haven't noticed, is a moving target. Like, one of the first, by the way, most consequential revelations, if we go back to Snowden and his reporting, that the leading big tech companies, including Google, Apple, and Facebook, were turning over massive amounts of data about their users to the NSA without so much as a warrant under the state and corporate program called PRISM. A newly obtained document by Revolver News' Darren Beatty reveals that Jankowicz has worked since 2015 on programs to control disinformation on the internet in conjunction with a horde of national security state officials, billionaire-funded NGOs, and the nation's largest media corporations. So are you starting to see how this system has come together and is working in conjunction with each other? This isn't like some nebulous, oh no, some like Twitter twit, like some like medium level guy is just deciding in a room of his own volition that this is, no, is it like, do they have like nurses and doctors on staff telling, no, this is a coordinated system that's working. It's working to solve what their goal is. Ample reporting has revealed that many of big tech's most controversial censorship policies were implemented at the behest of the U.S. government and the Democratic-controlled Congress that openly threatens regulatory and legal reprisals for failure to comply. So when you start to like really I want to say back into this, but when you start to really delve into this and get deeper and deeper, you're like, wait a second, we've crossed the line from private entities deciding what people can say and not say on their platform, which is already kind of questionable and maligned with our basic constitutional principles. But whatever, I see that there's a private company argument, like they're not the government. But then when it starts to get so entangled with the government funding these organizations and these efforts, the government in talks actively all the time, especially our intelligence agencies, and talks all the time with these big tech platforms. They have they have a portal where they can submit concerns about disinformation. They have a portal. There's a portal for it, a government portal. I'll post a link to that too, because I don't want to get like marked for disinformation there. Yeah. So every newly declared crisis, as I said, genuine or contrived, whether it's real or not, is immediately seized upon to justify all new levels and types of online censorship. We saw it just with the attack of Nancy Pelosi's husband. Who, for my estimation, looks like he has mental illness, most definitely, addiction, most definitely. He has oscillated between extreme political views, sometimes on the left, sometimes on the right. And this time was really involved in like super right-winged, angry blogs and stuff like that. Was mad at Nancy Pelosi, wanted to talk to Nancy Pelosi. And what does the coordinated effort of the progressives and by progressives I mean like both political and in media and in corporations, what is their coordinated narrative around that? This is why we need censorship. This is why we should have the power to do this, because look, this guy heard this stuff and then he took a hammer to, as if there are no other factors involved in that. It couldn't be the drugs, couldn't be the long-standing mental illness. It couldn't be any of those things. It's got to be just the right-wing narrative. That's what it is. So all these crises, everything that happens, it's immediately seized upon to justify all new levels and types of online censorship and increasingly more and more offline punishment, oftentimes in the form of financial seizure and the inability to participate freely in the financial system. The Hunter Biden laptop, election deniers, Ukraine, Hillary's emails, COVID origin, the vaccine, mask efficacy, trans-affirming care to minors, the Capitol riots, BLM protests and riots. All of these are examples that are seized upon. Like, pick a crisis, any crisis, because they're doing a damn good job of creating crises. Anyone who urged people to use masks at the start of the pandemic was accused of spreading dangerous disinformation, because Dr. Anthony Fauci and the WHO insisted at the time, the World Health Organization, they insisted at the time that masks were useless or worse. So did a Duke study, by the way, that never saw the light of day, but said it could potentially be worse to wear a mask, because you cough into the thing, all the particles spread and creates just a bunch more particles. So if anything, the data and the studies, the very few studies that we do have, point to, at best, ineffective. At worst, probably can do a little bit more damage. When Fauci and the WHO decided masks were an imperative, anyone questioning that decree by insisting that cloth masks were ineffective, the exact view of Fauci and the WHO just weeks earlier was banned from big tech platforms for spreading disinformation. It's ridiculous. Such bans by Google included sitting U.S. senators who themselves are medical doctors. From the start of the pandemic, it was prohibited to question whether the COVID virus may have leaked from a lab in Wuhan, until the Biden administration itself asked that question and ordered an investigation to find out, at which point Facebook and other platforms reversed themselves and announced that it was now permissible to ask this question, since the U.S. government itself was doing so. Who's driving this again? Rewind and re-listen. Or just read this article that I'm going to post in the show notes. Regardless of one's views on the Biden administration's involvement in this war, surely it requires little effort to see how dangerous it is to try to impose a full-scale blackout on challenges to U.S. war policy, especially given the warning by Biden himself that this war has brought the world closer to nuclear Armageddon than at any time since 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. Fun fact too, because you wonder where's the incentive here? It's everywhere, but as an example, Google and Amazon received billions in contracts from the CIA, NSA, and the Pentagon. And as we talked about, I've talked about lobbying, the most vocal lobbyists working to preserve big tech monopoly power are former security state operatives. Illustrating this alignment, Facebook at the start of the war in Ukraine implemented an exception to its rule banning. So here, Facebook had and has a rule like you can't praise Nazi groups unless they're the groups fighting on our side in Ukraine. Oh God, really? Ah, we hate anti-Semitism unless they're fighting on our side in Ukraine. Yeah, there's the Azov battalion and other neo-Nazi Ukrainian militia who are fighting in this war on our side. So you can prop them up, and you cannot malign them. You cannot speak out against that because it's in this case, like anti-Ukraine is like worse than anti-Semitism, according to this Facebook decision. And the big problem here too is like partisan divide has widened over this issue. And what I mean by that is if you look at polls, the lines used to be kind of close. The blue line, so Democrats, and then the red line, Republican, right under it, kind of on where they stand on censorship and the ability of government and big tech, their ability should be to censor misinformation. On the Democrat line, the blue line, that's going up and up and up and up. And on the red line, it's going down and down and down and down. So now we're divided over free speech itself and censorship itself. Again, understandably so, because this is ideologically driven and funded and coordinated by the most powerful people in our country and even in our world. This is like we are up against a big battle here. And the problem is that they're getting ordinary people like you and me to believe that this is not only justifiable, it is morally necessary to censor people who dissent. The Republican National Convention, I don't know, the RNC sues Google over email censorship. So I'm going to post an article about this too. Google is sending a lot of the RNC emails to spam in a very, like their deliverability is literally going to zero, like from 50 something percent to when they send their emails like 0%, like when they send their most like emails. And these are people who've opted in. When you click subscribe, if you subscribe to any like RNC or Republican candidate emails, you better check your spam folder. This is real. This is happening. They're suing over it. The Department of Homeland Security is quietly broadening its effort to curb speech it considers dangerous. An investigation by The Intercept has found. So I'm going to post this. This is a great, compelling article. So years of internal DHS memos. This is our own Department of Homeland Security emails and documents obtained both via leaks and as well as an ongoing lawsuit and public documents illustrate an expansive effort by the agency to influence tech platforms. So this is, again, not just a one-off here and there, piecemeal private companies thing. They just all happen to be like kind of censoring the same types of information. This is our government is highly involved, highly. Twitter, for example, met with DHS regularly to discuss censorship. Yeah, and I think it's why even in midterm conversations, I think that's why you see all of the Democrat ads. What are they talking about? They're refusing to talk about the economy and their plans there. I think they're like, oh, kind of lost the battle there. But I think, in my opinion, they're talking about like they've gone all in on abortion and protecting democracy. Because that is the message that it doesn't matter if we're doing a piss poor job. What matters is like our country's going to fall apart and be ruled by white supremacist evil crazies if we don't win. That's the message. And their ad spending shows that they've gone all in on that narrative. And I hope that more and more people like myself and like you watching, hopefully, will start to call BS, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum. I think the dangers of this in my mind, if I'm a left-wing person, here's what I'm thinking. We're going to lose a lot of our people. The more this stuff gets out, the more we insist on having these conversations, even when we get censored, the more we find ways to disseminate this information and our opinions on these matters, the more we question what is happening, the more we demand that our leaders act as public servants rather than the way they're acting now, which is personal, like protecting their personal interests and therefore the corporate interests that continue to fund them and protect them. Unless we start to demand these things collectively, I think liberals are going, like, I know some formerly staunch liberals like myself who are like, I'm thinking about voting Republican now because there's no other home, and they see through the BS narrative that all republicanism is this like white supremacist, bigoted, anti-Semitic, evil BS. I'm telling you, I'm voting all red in the midterms. I've looked through like the candidates and who I plan on voting for. Some of my votes, I'm like, I don't love the options, but this is the best of the options that we have. I'm voting all red. And that's saying something because I have never in my life voted all red. I have voted for, I believe, one Republican before, unless it was like the only option that I just didn't vote. But I've always voted blue. This will be my first election where I'm going all red. And I don't think that I'm the only one. And I think the danger in it and what I've tried not to get sucked into is the us, just going us versus them in the other direction. There's a human tendency to go ditch to ditch. And I think you're running the risk of what's happening right now is you're either galvanizing people on the left and making them even more extreme and fearful of the other side and hateful towards the other side, or you're pushing people away from you and galvanizing the right. We're just more galvanized and staunchly like set in stone one way or the other. And I think, especially with public figures and people who speak out, they tend to, there's a tendency too to get boxed in because you feel like, oh, this side gives me a home. This side is safe. This side is reinforcing and validating. That side rejected me and I saw through the BS of that side. And so I'm going to stay with this side. And you go in all in on the other side. And there's danger in that too. So, if you're listening, stay strong, stay independent minded, stay open, stay like just keep your eyes open, stay awake. Like I know it can seem painful at times, but you can stay awake to this stuff. Like there's all sorts of crazy stuff going on in the world, but life is beautiful. I was just thinking about this today because I'm like, how do I have so much joy and happiness in the midst of so much BS? Like I walked into Kroger, there was no formula, but there was no shortage of sugar and candy. I was like, and meanwhile, I'm hearing my reminder for the umpteenth millionth time on the speaker to get vaccinated. Brought to you by Pfizer and BioNTech. You just friends over there, just interested in your health. And I was like, you know what? If I've been fascinated by World War II history for as long as I can remember, and so I've done a lot of reading on both the kind of war front of things, but also on the Jewish people in concentration camps and their experiences. And oftentimes I heard so much like joy and hope and just purpose in their lives. And I'm like, if that was in the middle of a concentration camp in war times, and I don't mean to be offensive here, if you or your family, if your family or you were personally kind of impacted by that, or if that hits close to home to you, I just mean that with respect. Like if they can have joy and purpose and be, hopeful and positive and fulfilled in that environment, I think we can too. Like I think you're going to be fine, and we can live our day-to-day lives with joy and passion and persistence and determination and just life. So even when your head gets in the clouds with this stuff, like be sure to keep your feet firmly planted on the ground in your own life. Thanks, guys.